Hello, this is Becca Petunia, and welcome to ToughPigs at 25, a Muppet fan podcast from ToughPigs.com. That's right, ToughPigs is 25 years old now. That's as old as Sesame Street's 32nd season. Anyway, 5 years ago, Joe Hennis sat down to interview each member of the ToughPigs team in a podcast we called ToughPigs at 20. Now, 5 years later, I'm sitting down to talk to all the folks who have joined our family since then. How did they get started in Muppet fandom? What brought them to Tough Pigs? All this and more in our most self-congratulatory mini-series yet. I'm joined today by a wonderful writer and podcaster with the Tough Pigs family. She has been working with Tough Pigs since 2021, and has done so many things since then, though almost all of them are related to one particular corner of the Hensonverse, and I am, of course, speaking about the Belching Boulder. Um, joined live from the Belching Boulder, Beth Cook.
We got our timing wrong. I belched off mic just before we recorded. Dang it.
You know,
You could have told me to hold that in.
I told you like years ago that you should name your apartment the Belching Boulder, and now I'm just
Fair.
circling back to that joke. No, I'm of course speaking about Fraggle Rock, not the Belching Boulder. You've done so much related to Fraggle Rock, as well as other stuff too. Thank you so much for being here, even if I'm going to insist on calling your apartment the Belching Boulder.
You go right ahead. uh, Thank you so much for having me. How you doing, Becca?
I'm doing great. So, Beth, we're gonna start to talk a little bit about your how you kind of joined the Tough Pigs family. But I think before we talk about how you joined the Tough Pigs family, we need to talk a little bit about how you got involved with Muppets in the first place. How
hmm
did you get involved with, like, how did you become a Muppet fan?
That's a great question because up until right around the time that I discovered Tough Pigs, I don't know if I necessarily would have called myself a Muppet fan more than I thought everyone was. I just kind of assumed that everyone grew up watching Sesame and Muppet Show and Fraggles and everybody. And for the longest time, I just never knew about fandom scenes. I should have been a Tumblr kid, but I missed it entirely. I had no idea what online fandom spaces looked like in the early days of the internet. And I had no idea that there were ways to connect with other people that had the same interests as you. And most especially, I had no idea that I liked the Muppets more than most people. That kind of became clear, I think, right around the time when Jim Henson The Works came out. And this is, a similar story for a lot of people, that that book came out right around the time when I was assigned in high school to do a biographic paper on someone who inspires you. And I thought, oh, well, this book has just come out. What if I, use that as an excuse to learn more about Jim Henson and uh, learn a little bit more about uh, the history of the Muppets and the aspects of his career that I'd never learned about before. And I remember specifically standing in line at Barnes and Noble, and we got up to the counter and we heard the total, and my mom just said, "There's always money for books." And we got the book, and it's still on my shelf today, and it's been an incredibly useful resource. And that was how I started digging more into the Muppet fandom and understanding how much there was to know, and then slowly over the next decade or so realizing like, oh, okay, I like the Muppets more than most people I've met, but I still had never connected with any other Muppet nerds until one day I attended a local poetry reading that was uh, the featured poet was one Julia Gaskell, who mentioned offhand that she had a chapbook of Muppet poems.
So real quick, I do just wanna pause a second, and just this might just be a question for me. Beth, I know you're older than me, but were you really in high school in 1993, or did
Wait,
maybe
that
you
came out
not?
in 93?
Yeah, that's why I'm a little astonished that you're like, yeah, the book just came out.
Oh,
I'm
well,
like,
there you go. I wasn't online. I had
yeah,
no
that's
idea when
that's
stuff
what
was
I mean
happening.
is more proof, because I'm like, I
Living in a
know.
small town, you don't hear about things until several years later.
Well, and
No, this
that's
would have been
and
like 2002-ish for me.
okay, because that makes more sense. I'm like,
Yeah,
I'm
yeah,
like,
yeah.
I know, yeah, because I was two when the works came out, so
No, God, I
I was
forget.
like, I don't think she's 12 years older than me. Um, but but I think that's such a great point, and I know it's something that I've been talking about or will be talking about because these episodes are coming out in a different order than I'm recording them. But something that I will be talking about is just I feel like today a lot of people don't understand just how difficult it was to learn about Muppet stuff when we were kids. Again,
Yeah,
like, of course you didn't know that the works came out in 1993 unless you happened to see it on a table at Barnes and Noble or Borders or something like that, or your local library. How would you know that a Muppet book came out?
yeah. In 1993, I was living in an even smaller town, teeny little town in uh, Iowa, and we didn't have a large bookstore. I mean, I loved going to the library, but I don't know if we even had a bookstore at all. And it was only, when going to, frankly, the hospital in Iowa City that I ever got to see anything big and exciting. And yeah, fast forward several years, 93. Wow.
Let me double check. I'm pretty sure I'm right. I'm often right.
I believe you.
Yes, The Works was published in 1993.
Wow.
But that's my point is again like
Yeah,
you don't even know what you don't know. And
exactly.
again, all of this information is at our fingertips and when new Muppet stuff comes out, obviously there is a Tough Pigs for it. In 1993 there was no Tough Pigs. There was no Muppet Zine even in 1993. Muppet
Yeah.
Zine formed shortly after that. So yeah, it doesn't surprise me that you didn't really think of like know this stuff until high school. And it also doesn't surprise me that maybe you didn't realize Tough Pigs even existed until you met Julia Gaskell. And there's
Yeah.
my transition back to where we left off in the story. So you met Julia, and Julia was talking about her book of Muppet poetry.
hmm She
And
only mentioned it offhand. She didn't, recite any Muppet poetry that night. It was all more standard stuff. But a little ding went off in my brain. And afterwards, I, went up to buy her chapbook and chat with her about it. And then, months passed, and she was still the only person that I'd ever heard of to mention, loving Muppets this much. And so when I got the idea to start my lyrics blog, she was the person I reached out to say, "Is this anything? Do you think people would read? Like, what do I do?" And she was so kind to be like, "Oh, yeah, that's a great idea." And I would, post it on the Tough Pigs forums. And that's how I learned about Tough Pigs and became a forum member.
so two questions there. First of all, what is this lyrics blog? Because people at home might not know.
Right. This is Our Muppet Melody, which, God, I should have researched when I started that. I want to say maybe like 2017-ish, 16. I haven't worked on it in a few years. Um, but yes, it is there where I've collected. Uh,
It looks like April 2017 was your first post.
Thank you.
Do you know what was your first post?
Oh, it would have been the first song from The Tale of the Bunny Picnic because that
It
was the
sure
first
was. It
project I
was
did.
Hello Sunshine,
Yep.
Balsam and Lee.
And for
And
me,
yeah,
that was the whole point, was to try and transcribe these lyrics that I couldn't find anywhere else. You know, if you look up the lyrics to any popular song, you could find lyric sites for it, but I couldn't find Muppet lyrics. And especially the more obscure the project, the less likely you are to find them. Like you can find the lyrics to Rainbow Connection anywhere.
it's also just so great. This blog is great, and I'll post a link, but
Oh,
you do a
thanks.
great job giving some commentary here about all of the songs. I'm actually looking at some Big Bird and China stuff right now because I was just
Oh, I
clicking
love those.
around,
Yeah.
and like you're like, okay, here's how far it is for all of the major places they mention going to in the "We're Going to China" song.
Yeah.
It would take 9 days, 4 hours, and 15 minutes to travel the route that they mention. Great stuff there. But
Thanks.
it looks like so that would have been 2017. So I have
Mhm.
to assume then that you discovered Tough Pigs around that same time in
Yes.
2017.
Yeah. I started, looking at some of the articles and realizing, oh, there's so much here that they've been going for years. And I never knew. So I, tried to stay up to date when Muppet News came in, but then I was delighted to find that, these folks weren't just talking about like the new projects that everyone had heard of, but really the obscure stuff that was where, all of the fun lies.
So I know that one of the things that and we can cut this potentially, but one of the things that started you writing for Tough Pigs obviously was that we needed someone to take some Fraggle stuff as more new Fraggle stuff started happening, but
Mm.
also it was your displeasure at some of Tough Pig's anti-fanfic policies that I know really bothered you at the time. Um, Becca
Oh.
remembers everything, Beth Cook. So you want to talk a little bit about that experience, or do you want me to just cut all of this?
Uh, what's the question exactly? To
When you
me they
were
seem
when you were
unrelated.
so when you were complaining, like you complained on the forum that you
Uh-huh.
wished Tough Pigs would let you post fanfic.
Well, not necessarily. Talk about fanfic was what I
Okay.
wanted. Yeah.
Okay. So I that was one of the first times I was made aware of you is when you were talking about wanting to us to talk about fanfic. And I
I
remember
was sorry, go ahead.
I was gonna say I remember Joe, explained there's a couple of reasons why we don't.
Right.
Although sometimes it is just momentum that is just like, well, we don't do that because we don't do that.
Yep.
But again, it was an interesting thing because I think you hit on a point that just like Tough Pigs maybe isn't doing all of the things that it can be doing to really engage with the world of fandom.
Mm. Yeah, for me, I was still new enough that when, someone tried to explain it by saying kind of offhandedly, this isn't Muppet Central, I was like, What does that mean?"
Right. If you hadn't joined Tough Pigs until 2017, you didn't know the you don't know the drama. You don't
Hmm.
know the epics. You haven't listened to Danny Horn's episode of Commitment where he talks about the drama that led him to separate
Ooh.
from Muppet Central.
Oh, I'll have to go listen to that. I'm always excited to learn more about everything that was going on in the meantime that I missed. But yeah, to me, I had basically at that point in my life was learning how nebulous the line is between, folks just kind of riffing off the cuff about like, oh, wouldn't it be fun to do a Muppet recast of this movie or that movie? And actual fan fiction that people write out. And then the new projects that get made with the actual Muppets, like someone had to write that. Basically, the thing that clicked in my mind was I was at Jim Henson Con in Seattle, this very small but lovely event where I got to meet Karen Frell. That was awesome. And I saw all of these Muppet related books on the shelf, and one of them was a novelization of something in the world of the Dark Crystal. I don't know if it was the movie itself or a prequel story, something like that. But, it had, you know, Jim Henson Company logo on it, like it was official Dark Crystal. And I thought, someone got paid to write that. Presumably someone who has seen and enjoyed the movie. This is fan fiction. And I think the line between the two is blurrier than we like to admit, and I want to talk about that.
It is an interesting thing to talk about. I definitely think we could write some articles about this at least. We'll add that to the list.
Oh yeah, it's always on the list.
But the other way that you kind of became involved with Tough Pigs proper, not just the forum, was of course doing Fraggle Rock stuff. And
Mm-hmm.
it's so interesting because Tough Pigs turned 20 and we did these Tough Pigs at 20 um podcasts that this is a sequel to would have been August 2021. And you were not a part of this project, which is why you are a part of this 25 years podcast project. But so shortly after that, you were off to the races because, again, looks like your first article was November 1st, 2021, where you reviewed the book that would eventually become known by you as The Tome.
The tome.
I am, of course, speaking of Fraggle Rock, the ultimate visual history. Did Joe ask you to review that, or did you ask Joe? How did that start?
Um, I asked Joe. I had uh, already been in contact with him for a bit to talk about the possibility of a Fraggle Rock podcast. Um, it was something that I had been thinking about for a long time and realizing, oh, I have so much to say about this world that I feel like I could do a watch along podcast where we do a deep dive into each episode. I feel like there's enough there. Um, but I didn't know yet how to do such a thing. And at this point, I hadn't really thought about joining Tough Pigs. To me, it seemed like not necessarily like celebrity status, but like at least one step above me, if not several steps above me. And I think it was only when, an article mentioned offhand that like, oh, and we're always looking for, new writers and new voices to bring in. And I went, oh, what? Oh, well, maybe that could be me. And so yeah, well, first I reached out to Anthony. I was like, how do I ask about this? And he's like, oh, you should ask Joe. Here's how you do that. And I, talked a little bit about like, hey, I've got an idea for a Fraggle podcast. Here's the Muppets lyrics blog that I've been doing for a while. I think I highlighted that Big Bird in China one in particular because I was particularly proud of that one. Um, so I'd already been in conversations with Joe for a little bit, and he let me know that, oh yeah, we've thought about doing a Fraggle Rock podcast, and we even had this great, we had the perfect punny name for it, but no one really had the time or energy or dedication to actually make it happen. And while that was well, what would eventually become Fraggle Talk Classic started, was a little bit in the works at that point. I knew that the complete visual history, or the ultimate visual history, I should know this. The ultimate visual history.
Yes.
Yeah. I knew that it was coming out, and I reached out to Joe and said, "Hey, is anyone already planning on writing a review of this? Because if so, no worries. I don't want to step on anyone's toes. But if not, I'd love to try my hand at writing an article for Tough Pigs to do a review of this book." And he said, "Yeah, go for it."
And it is really interesting because I think people don't realize that podcasts were not that large of a part of Tough Pigs, like prior to 2021.
Mm-hmm.
Again, there was just moving right along for a while, and then there was moving right along and sporadically Joe podcasts like 15 seconds to curtain. But
Yeah.
the idea now where like basically all of us have a podcast was not part of Tough Pigs at the time. It doesn't surprise me that you're saying like everybody, no one wanted to do this Fraggle Rock podcast because I feel like if you said now, like if your show didn't exist and you said now, like, oh, does anyone want to do a Fraggle podcast? Like a lot of people would say yes, but at the time it
Yeah.
was just completely different. So not only did you do that in 2021, but or by the beginning of the next year, you were reviewing Fraggle Rock Back to the Rock episodes. Looks like you from season one, you did The Glow, a classic episode. But real quick, you were brought on to help Joe with Fraggle Talk Back to the Rock, the podcast that Joe did with John Tartaglia and Hallie Stanford. And you had like a regular segment with Hallie Stanford. How did that all come to be? How did that all get started?
Yeah. I remember being so blown away when that happened. We'd had the what would become Fraggle Talk Classic a little bit in the works, but nothing, you know, nothing ready to air for quite some time. When we found out, hey, guess what? Fraggle Rock is getting a full-on reboot. And Joe let me know that, Henson had reached out to Tough Pigs to say, hey, would y'all want to collaborate on a podcast to promote this new series? And Joe, thank goodness, was thoughtful enough to say, absolutely, but I would love to bring on this person who has been working on this project in the meantime. I think she'd be a great resource to bring on for this little segment. And that's how I got involved with it. At that point, it was the coolest thing I'd ever done, and still wanted to put it like at the top of my resume forever. I was so happy to be involved.
Your section of that podcast was always such a delight because, again, you could tell just how excited you were to be there. And that was always such a pleasure. And, you weren't really involved with the season two of the Back to the Rock podcast, but by then Fraggle Talk Classic had begun in full.
Hmm.
I know you mentioned that that's something that you were working on for a while, and I know, I think you've talked about how there was an earlier version that
Hmm.
didn't quite work.
Yeah.
Um, how did that kind of come to be? How'd you decide to do it with Julia and Adam? How did that kind of happen?
Yeah. So I was at the point where basically the idea had been given the green light. Like if you can produce a pilot episode that feels, up to the Tough Pig standards, and we feel like this is going to be a project that can really, sustain itself and be Tough Pig's quality, then absolutely go for it. And I was scrambling to figure out, okay, what is this going to look like? Because I don't want it to be just me. That seems both like too much work and boring as heck. and I want to get more voices in on this. But again, the folks that I knew were limited to, at that point, pretty much just the Tough Pigs folks. And
Which was much smaller at the time.
it was much smaller at the time. And the folks that I had, worked with one on one was even smaller. And, I asked a few folks, and of course, everyone was like very supportive of the idea, but very busy with their own stuff. And um, I honestly didn't think Julia was going to say yes. And I'm so glad she did. Even if she's ridiculously busy, I'm so glad that she committed to this project. Um, and I remember thinking that that was a good angle to have three hosts watching the show from three different perspectives. And, Julia easily fit that perspective of an established Muppet fan who loves Fraggle Rock, and she'd written about the Fraggles many times, and but hadn't done like a dedicated rewatch in a while. We say 10 years on the podcast.
You've been saying 10 years on the podcast for like 5 years,
Yeah,
but
exactly. And uh that third voice, I really didn't know how to fill that spot, because everyone I knew at Tough Pigs, they weren't watching for the first time. Everyone's seen Fraggle Rock.
many times in my
Yeah.
case.
And I had connected with someone uh, over the internet who was a was a Muppet fan, and was interested in doing this project with us. And we sat down to meet in person and talk it out, and then we got together virtually to record a pilot episode. And it didn't feel great. Like I feel like the conversation wasn't flowing as naturally, and the energy wasn't as dynamic as I would have wanted. And I sent it off to Joe, and I was like, "What do you think?" And he was like, "Well, I don't know. This isn't quite up to Tough Pig standards." And I was like, "Okay, thank goodness." I
You were like, phew, I
Yeah.
didn't want this to be up to Tough Pig standards.
And it was helpful to get, another perspective on it, to talk about the specifics of what could go better. And really, Adam was the missing piece that I didn't know that we needed. He and I had been kind of like peripheral acquaintance friends, from a shared social circle that we were both in, and this, event that we would both go to annually, but we hadn't really connected one on one. But we were Facebook friends, and he just mentioned randomly, like, "Hey, I'm always looking for folks to watch Muppet stuff with." And I went, "Aha."
Aha.
I had no idea he was a Muppet nerd. And so we started, again, this was during the pandemic, so we started virtually watching Muppet stuff together. And I realized, like, oh, this could be the type of energy and enthusiasm that is like the exact right niche. Uh, and he loved the idea of, like, yeah, I love the Muppets, but I've never seen any Fraggle Rock. And uh, we shot another pilot episode, and it went much better. And Joe was like, "Yes, this is what I'm talking about." Um, and now it's 3 seasons later. And I had no idea when I brought Adam on that it was anything more than like, oh, this is a person who's good to have a conversation with, keeps the energy up, and is watching for the first time. What I had no idea about was his ability to do, like, his critical media analysis skills are just mind blowing.
Oh,
And I'm
amazing. I
so
mean,
glad that that worked out the way that it did.
yeah, because again, and obviously, you know that this is a lot of how I engage with media as well. Not to make this about me, but one thing that I really love about Fraggle Talk Classic is how deeply you guys think about what's going on in each episode. You know, especially Adam, but this also isn't about Adam right now. This is about you. And you do such a great job of that too. You know,
Thank you.
it could so easily just be like a play-by-play, you know, and then Gobo did this,
Yeah.
and then Wembley did this. But you're not doing that because you're not interested in doing it that way. And I think that that's so important and so wonderful.
Thank you. Yeah, I knew when I started this project that that was, to me, the whole point is that I saw how much it's a show with a lot of meat on the bones. Like there is so much to talk about there. And, if you're only watching for the first time as a little kid, you're gonna, get drawn in by all this magic that you don't quite understand. And then the more I was able to learn about it as an adult, the more I realized, oh, there's a lot going on here. There's a lot we could talk about.
Yeah, those little green bones.
Exactly.
So some of the other stuff that you do at Tough Pigs, you know, some of it involves the Fraggles as well. I love your Fraggle foodie stuff.
Oh,
So
thank
I
you.
do want to give a shout out to that. I do really want garlic and onion cupcakes, so get on that
Yes.
ASAP.
Well, you
Um,
and I had talked about doing a double uh onion cupcakes
Right, we
article.
did. We did. So what folks don't know, and I've hinted a couple times, is my spouse and I are actually also working on a cooking series. So we had
Yay.
thought about doing some kind of crossover, but this cooking series from Lee and I, from Eli and I, is just not getting off the ground.
Mm,
So I don't know, maybe onion cupcakes will be what kicks it into gear. Who knows?
there you go.
Um, and some of the other things, though, that you do are so wonderful and so wonderfully personal. You know, you joined my sort of Pride Month crew, my crew of Pride Month regulars pretty early on. Uh, June 2022, I think that was our first Tough Pigs Pride Month. Um,
Wow.
I think so. Um, Well, you gotta remember, like obviously Danny is gay, but Danny wasn't writing for Tough Pigs for a while.
Yeah.
It wasn't really like until I came again, Julia is out, but Julia doesn't write that often. It wasn't
Mhm.
really until I came out that we decided, you know what, we're going all in on Pride.
I love that.
But
Yeah,
yeah, would have
because
been
you knew about folks, different identities if they were out about it. But you're right, people hadn't really written specifically about queer issues and the Muppets. That's wow, thank you for starting Pride Month at Tough Pigs, Becca.
you know, again, this isn't about me, but I just made it about me again. But you were one of the early people, you know, again, talking about your asexuality, and later, you know, as recently as this year, sort of talking about how the Muppets have kind of helped you come to terms with your gender as well. You
Yeah.
want to talk a little bit about Neuro Fairy Muppet gender right here, which combines some of the personal stuff you've done for my Pride Month stuff and also some of the personal stuff you've done for our friend JD Hansel's Beacon stuff on neurodivergence.
Yeah, that was a big one for me. For me, joining Tough Pigs and finding such a natural and comfortable home among these weirdos. At the same time, I was very much building a friend group of local neurodivergent queers that I was hanging out with and very much figuring out my own neurodivergence. Like, hey, maybe the diagnosis that I got in high school was inaccurate. Maybe they missed a thing or two. Maybe things have developed since then. And I was learning constantly. And like many folks can identify with this, that autism became my special interest for a while. And the more I learned, the more I went, oh no, this explains so much. In the last couple of years, I'd been basically recovering from autistic burnout. I kind of hit a wall in my professional life and went, I can't do this anymore. I can't keep pretending that differences that I'm experiencing out in the world aren't really impactful on me, and that trying to appear normal and palatable to most people was eating up most of my energy. And, it took many years to get to this point. Like, I only realized my initial queerness of figuring out that I was both on the asexual spectrum and bisexual. I figured that out at age 30. You know, I didn't know I was queer growing up. And
Same deal. I was, I think,
right.
29. So
And I thought, oh, great, I've figured it out now. There's nothing more to figure out. Oops, I was wrong. There's more. And it was such an incredible process. Uh, and I spoke to you about this. I wasn't at the time comfortable enough talking about it with anyone other than my trans friends, but I was like, hey, so I went through all of my notes and I just like searched for the word gender, and then I searched for, you know, anything like neuro or autism or ADHD. And when I put all of those notes together, it read like a timeline of me figuring stuff out in real time and realizing that the two things were really kind of inextricable from each other. And, like I mentioned in the article, that it was my therapist that mentioned that, oh, there actually is a word for how these two things can be connected. And at the time, didn't think it applied to me. Just like, oh, cool. I'm glad that that's a word that exists for the people who need it. And then figured out, whoops, okay, yep, I'm glad that exists for me. So yeah, that article was several years in the works, but especially last summer, I knew that it was something that I wanted to talk about, but I wasn't sure exactly how yet. And I'm really glad that I gave myself the space to talk about it a little bit with, the folks that felt safer to do so. And all of them went, yes, absolutely. That makes total sense for you. Please keep going. We want to see whatever this evolves into. And yeah, Neuro Fairy Muppet Gender was the result of that.
it's a wonderful article and it's so personal. And I'm so glad that I could help even in a small way. Even if I think the bigger way I helped was not any of the transness, but specifically giving you recommendations of Abby Cadabby clips to watch.
A million
Because
percent.
I understand what I'm good for. But I digress. Beth, what do you think the Muppets should do next?
Ooh, interesting. I mean, I feel like I should have a snappy answer off the cuff ready to go, but I really don't. As much as I like to talk about, you know, the new projects could just be called fan fiction, and anyone could get good enough at writing for the Muppets to go from fan fiction to approved stamp of approval Jim Henson Company productions and Disney productions. The reality is writing for the Muppets is incredibly hard.
It
And I feel
is.
like the longer that they exist, the harder it is. Because not only do you have this incredible legacy to live up to, but you've got the entire Muppet fandom now online looking under a microscope at every single thing that comes out. And that's got to be nearly impossible to strike that right balance of what do I personally, as a writer, believe that is the right direction for the Muppets to go? What corporate restraints am I working under that I have no control over? Uh, there's so much that's got to go into that that I don't feel like I'm qualified to say what the Muppets should do next. I don't even know what I would like to see them do next because every idea that people are throwing out there, my brain now immediately goes to the ways in which it could go wrong. And that feels terrible to say, but like, we're always so hopeful when a new project comes out. Like the Muppets Mayhem was a perfect example. And even though it was great and it did really well and it got canceled anyway, that trying to answer what should the Muppets do next, I feel like is almost impossible because even if they create something that everyone loves and does really well, it might not get greenlit for more stuff. So who knows? Good luck. Good luck to them. Everyone who's out there making official Muppet content, oh my gosh, like you have our blessing and our best hopes, and woof.
But anyone who's making unofficial Muppet content, you hate, right? That's what you're getting at?
Right. No, including myself.
Hmm,
Yeah.
hmm, hmm.
No, I love connecting with the folks who are making their own fan content. And yeah, it's, to a certain degree, be the Muppet content you wish to see in the world.
One of the things that I like to say when, again, because I've been lucky enough to talk to so many creatives in my different lines of work. And one of the things that I always like to say when people ask me, like, well, what would you want to see such and such do? What would you want to see the X-Men do? What would you want to see, what would you want to see Abby Cadabby do? And a lot of the times I think the best answer is I don't know what I want to see these characters do because what I wish I could feel again is surprised.
Mm.
I wouldn't have thought, oh, what the Muppets really need to do is they need to, do a heist caper in London. Like, nobody would have said that. Nobody would have said that. Nobody
Hmm.
would have said that Big Bird needs to go to China. Like, so sometimes I think the answer is I don't know. And I think that that's fine. I think sometimes the truth is we don't know anything.
Yeah.
Beth, where can people find you online if you wish to be found?
Mostly at toughpigs.com, but I'm occasionally doing other stuff on social media at Beth Anna Cook. That's Anna with two N's. And I started a Patreon this summer, but it's completely free access. I'm just given quarterly updates about my journey as a writer and some meme dumps.
Can't go wrong with meme dumps. Can't go wrong with meme dumps.
Exactly.
Thank you so much for being here, Beth.
Thank
And
you so much for doing this.
I can't wait to collaborate on Pride Month stuff with you again next year.
Heck yeah.
Tough Pigs at 25 is a Muppet fan podcast brought to you by ToughPigs.com. It is hosted by Becca Petunia, produced by Jarrod Fairclough, and edited by Becca and Jarrod. Theme song by Alec, Koff. For more Tough Pigs podcasts and articles, visit us at toughpigs.com or at Tough Pigs on Instagram, Facebook, and Blue Sky. Support Tough Pigs on Patreon or by checking out our merch on TeePublic. Happy 25th birthday, Tough Pigs!